London, 1963. The rain was falling in sheets outside the window of a luxury hotel suite. Inside, the funniest man in the world was sitting alone in the dark, holding a bottle of pills, wondering if tonight was the night he would finally swallow them all. Peter Sellers had everything: fame, fortune, critical acclaim. He was Inspector Clouseau. He was Dr. Strangelove. He was a comedic genius who could make millions of people laugh with a single expression. And he wanted to die. The depression had been with him for as long as he could remember. It lived inside him like a second person, a dark passenger that whispered terrible things in his ear. You're a fraud. You're worthless. Nobody really loves you. They love the characters. They love the voices. But you? You're nothing. Tonight, the voice was louder than usual. Tonight, the pills in his hand seemed like the only logical solution. The phone rang. Peter stared at it. He didn't want to answer. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He wanted to be left alone with his darkness. The phone kept ringing. Finally, more out of annoyance than anything else, he picked it up. What? Hey, pal. You sound terrible. What's going on? Peter froze. He recognized that voice, the lazy drawl, the casual warmth. It was Dean Martin. Dean, why are you calling? I was thinking about you. Thought I'd check in. You okay? Peter looked at the pills in his hand. He looked at the rain on the window. He looked at the darkness that had been consuming him all night. I'm fine, he lied. Just tired. Yeah? You don't sound fine. You sound like a guy who's been sitting alone in the dark thinking too much. Peter's breath caught. How did Dean know? How could he possibly know? I'm going to tell you something, Dean continued, his voice gentle but firm. Whatever you're thinking about doing right now, don't do it. It's not worth it, trust me. Dean, I don't know what you're— Yeah, you do. And I'm telling you, it's not the answer, it never is. Whatever's happening in your head right now, it's lying to you. That voice that says everything is hopeless? It's full of crap. Peter couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down his face. Now here's what we're going to do, Dean said. We're going to talk. About nothing. About everything. I don't care. We're just going to talk until that voice shuts up. You got it? Dean, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. So shut up and talk to me. Tell me about your day. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about anything. I've got all night. They talked for 3 hours. About movies, about music, about the absurdity of fame, about nothing important at all. And somewhere in those 3 hours, the darkness receded. The pills went back in the bottle. The night passed without tragedy. When they finally hung up, Peter Sellers was still alive, and he had no idea that Dean Martin had just saved his life. This is the story of a friendship that nobody knew existed. A story of phone calls in the middle of the night. A story of two men who wore masks for the world, but showed their true faces to each other. This is the story of Dean Martin and Peter Sellers. To understand what Peter Sellers was fighting, you need to understand the nature of his darkness. Peter Sellers didn't just have bad days. He had a condition. What we would now call bipolar disorder, though in the 1960s they didn't have that language. They called it manic depression. They called it mood swings. They called it being difficult. Peter experienced life in extremes. When he was up, he was a hurricane of creative energy. He could work 18-hour days. He could inhabit characters so completely that people on set forgot they were watching an actor. He was brilliant, magnetic, unstoppable. But when he was down, he was unreachable. He would lock himself in dark rooms for days. He would push away everyone who loved him. He would spiral into a pit of self-loathing so deep that death seemed like the only escape. His marriages suffered. His children suffered. His career, despite its outward success, was a constant battle against his own mind. And nobody talked about it. In the 1960s, mental illness wasn't discussed. It was hidden. It was shameful. It was something you dealt with privately if you dealt with it at all. Peter dealt with it alone. Or he thought he did. Until Dean Martin. Their paths first crossed in 1962 at a party in Los Angeles. Peter was in town for a film. Dean was everywhere in those days. The Rat Pack, the movies, the television show. He was the king of cool. Peter expected Dean to be what everyone said he was. Charming but shallow, funny but superficial, the kind of person who floated through life without ever engaging with anything real. He was wrong. They ended up talking in a corner of the party, away from the crowd. Peter, in one of his manic phases, was doing voices and impressions, making Dean laugh. But at some point, the conversation shifted. Peter said something, a throwaway comment about feeling like a fraud, about wearing masks, about never knowing who he really was underneath all the characters. Dean's expression changed, just for a moment. The lazy smile faded, and Peter saw something else. Recognition. Understanding. "You too, huh?" Dean said quietly. "What do you mean?" Dean gestured at himself, at the glass in his hand, at the perfectly tailored tuxedo, at the image he projected to the world. "This. All of this. You think this is me. This is a character. Just like your Inspector Clouseau. Just like your Dr. Strangelove. I've been playing Dean Martin for so long I sometimes forget there's someone else underneath." Peter stared at him. In all his years in show business, no one had ever said anything like that to him. No one had ever admitted that they, too, were performing their own life. "Then who are you?" Peter asked. "Underneath?" Dean was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore, that's the problem." He took a sip of his drink. "But I'll tell you what I do know. The masks keep us safe. They protect us from the world. But they also keep us alone. And alone is a dangerous place to be." That conversation lasted until 3 in the morning, long after the party had ended, long after everyone else had gone home. Two men, sitting in an empty room, talking about things they had never talked about with anyone else. By the time the sun came up, something had formed between them. Not quite friendship, not yet, but a connection, an understanding, a recognition that they were fighting similar battles, even if they fought them in different ways. Before they parted, Dean gave Peter his private phone number. "If you ever need to talk," Dean said. "And I mean really talk. Not the show business crap. Real talk. Call me. Anytime. Day or night." Peter took the number. He assumed he would never use it. He assumed Dean was just being polite. He was wrong about that, too. 6 months later, Peter was in London, deep in one of his depressions. His second marriage was falling apart. A film project had collapsed. The darkness was closing in. He found himself holding Dean's number, staring at it, wondering if the offer had been real. At 2 in the morning, London time, he dialed. The phone rang 4 times. 5. Peter was about to hang up when Dean answered. "Hello?" Dean's voice was groggy. It was 6 in the evening in Los Angeles, but Dean sounded like he had been sleeping. "Dean? It's Peter. Peter Sellers. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Peter." Dean's voice changed immediately. More alert, more present. "What's going on? Talk to me. I don't know why I called, I needed to hear a voice. A real voice. I'm sorry, this is stupid." "It's not stupid. Tell me what's happening." And Peter told him. Everything. The depression. The failed marriage. The feeling of being a fraud. The voice in his head that told him he was worthless. He talked for over an hour, pouring out things he had never said to anyone. Dean listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't tell Peter to cheer up or look on the bright side. He just listened. When Peter finally ran out of words, Dean spoke. "First of all, thank you for calling. That took guts. Most people can't ask for help. The fact that you reached out means you're stronger than you think." Peter didn't feel strong. He felt pathetic. "Second," Dean continued, "that voice in your head, the one that says you're worthless, I have that voice too. Everybody does, I think. The trick is knowing that it's a liar. It sounds convincing, but it's lying. How do you make it stop? You don't. At least I haven't figured out how. But you can learn not to believe it. You can learn to hear it and say, yeah, okay, I hear you. Now shut up, I've got things to do. Peter almost laughed. Almost. It's not easy, Dean admitted. Some days it's damn near impossible. But you keep going. You wake up, you put one foot in front of the other, and you keep going. Because the alternative is letting the voice win. And screw that. That voice doesn't get to win. They talked for another hour. By the time they hung up, Peter felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Just a little. But enough. Dean, Peter said before hanging up, why do you care? We barely know each other. Dean was quiet for a moment. Because I see myself in you, Peter. And I know what it's like to fight that battle alone. Nobody should have to fight it alone. That phone call was the first of many. What started as a desperate reach for help became a ritual. Every week, sometimes more, Dean would call Peter, or Peter would call Dean. It didn't matter who initiated. What mattered was the connection. They never made a formal arrangement. It just happened. On Sunday nights, usually, Dean would pick up the phone and dial Peter's number, wherever Peter happened to be in the world. London, Rome, Los Angeles. It didn't matter. The conversations varied. Sometimes they talked about work. Sometimes they talked about women. Sometimes they talked about nothing at all. But underneath every conversation was an unspoken understanding. I'm checking on you. I'm making sure you're okay. I'm reminding you that you're not alone. Dean never called it that. He would never be so direct. He would frame it as casual. Hey pal, just calling to say hello. Or, I saw your movie last night, thought I'd tell you it was terrible. Always with humor, always with lightness, never with the weight of what it really was. But Peter knew. Peter always knew. The call saved his life more times than he could count. There were nights when the darkness was so complete that Peter couldn't see any reason to keep going. And then the phone would ring, and Dean's voice would be there. And somehow, impossibly, the darkness would recede just enough for Peter to make it through another night. Dean never asked for anything in return. He never told anyone about the calls. He never used his kindness as leverage or expected gratitude. He just kept calling, week after week, year after year. It was the most selfless thing anyone had ever done for Peter Sellers. The world saw two very different men. Dean Martin, the cool, unflappable entertainer who seemed to glide through life without a care. Peter Sellers, the brilliant but troubled genius, known for his difficult behavior and tumultuous personal life. Nobody saw the phone calls. Nobody knew about the 3 a.m. conversations. Nobody understood that behind their public images were two men who had found in each other something rare and precious. Acceptance. Dean accepted Peter's darkness. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it or pretend it wasn't there. He simply accepted it as part of who Peter was. And Peter accepted Dean's walls. He understood that Dean's cool exterior was a defense mechanism, a way of keeping the world at arm's length. He didn't try to break through those walls. He just let Dean be Dean. In that mutual acceptance, they found a friendship that neither of them had experienced before. A friendship without judgment, without expectations, without performance. When they talked on the phone, they weren't Dean Martin and Peter Sellers. They were just Dean and Peter. Two middle-aged men trying to make sense of lives that had given them everything except peace. The years passed. The phone calls continued. Peter's life remained turbulent. More marriages, more divorces, more battles with his mental health. His career soared and plummeted and soared again. He was impossible to work with. He was a genius. He was self-destructive. He was brilliant. Through all of it, Dean called. When Peter had his first heart attack in 1964, Dean was one of the first people to reach him. Not in person. That wasn't their way. But the phone rang in Peter's hospital room, and Dean's voice was there. I heard you tried to die. That's not allowed. We have a standing phone date. Peter laughed, even though it hurt. I didn't try to die. My heart had other ideas. Well, tell your heart to knock it off. I don't have that many friends, I can't afford to lose one. It was a joke. It was always jokes with Dean. But Peter heard what was underneath. I was scared. I'm glad you're okay. Please don't leave. When Peter had his second heart attack in 1977, the call came again. And the third time. And the fourth. Each time, Dean was there. A voice on the phone. A reminder that someone cared. You really need to take better care of yourself, Dean said after the fourth heart attack. I know. I'm serious, Peter. I'm running out of material for these phone calls. If you die, who am I going to talk to? You have plenty of friends. I have plenty of acquaintances. Friends? Real friends? I can count them on one hand. And you're one of them. So do me a favor and stick around. Peter promised he would try. In 1980, Peter Sellers was preparing for a film that would become his last. He was in London, feeling better than he had in years. The depression was manageable. His career was in a good place. He was even talking about retiring, about finally finding some peace. The phone rang on a Sunday night. Right on schedule. Hey, pal. Hello, Dean. How's the film going? Good. Really good, actually. I think this might be one of my best. That's great. You deserve a win. They talked for an hour. About the movie. About Dean's grandchildren. About getting older. About the strange journey their lives had taken. Before they hung up, Peter said something he rarely said. Thank you, Dean. For what? For calling. All these years. For not giving up on me. Dean was quiet for a moment. Don't mention it, pal. It's what friends do. No, it's not. Most friends don't call every week for 17 years. Most friends don't stay on the phone until 3 in the morning when someone is falling apart. What you've done, I don't know if I would still be here without it. Dean didn't respond for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer. More vulnerable than Peter had ever heard it. You know why I keep calling, Peter? Because every time I hear your voice, every time I know you made it through another week, it gives me hope. It reminds me that the darkness doesn't always win. You fighting your battle helps me fight mine. Peter didn't know what to say. So don't thank me, Dean continued. We're in this together. We always have been. That's how it works. They hung up with plans to talk the following Sunday. That conversation never happened. On July 24, 1980, Peter Sellers suffered a massive heart attack in his London hotel room. He was rushed to the hospital. He never regained consciousness. Peter Sellers died at 12:28 a.m. on July 24, 1980. He was 54 years old. Dean Martin was at home in Los Angeles when he got the call. It was late afternoon. He was sitting in his favorite chair watching television, waiting for Sunday night so he could call Peter. The phone rang. Dean answered, expecting nothing unusual. Mr. Martin, I'm calling from London. I'm afraid I have terrible news. Peter Sellers passed away this morning. Dean didn't speak. Mr. Martin, are you there? Yes, Dean finally said. I'm here. He hung up the phone. He sat in his chair for a long time. The television played, but Dean didn't see it. He was somewhere else, remembering. That first conversation at the party, the 3 a.m. phone calls, the years of checking in, of showing up, of being there, the jokes that weren't really jokes, the silences that said more than words, 17 years of friendship, and now it was over. Dean's daughter Gail found him an hour later, still sitting in the chair, tears streaming down his face. Dad? What happened? Dean looked at her. His face was older than she had ever seen it, broken in a way she didn't understand. Peter died. Gail knew they had been friends, but she didn't know the extent of it. Nobody did. I'm sorry, Dad. I know you liked him. Dean shook his head slowly. I didn't like him, Gail. I loved him. He was my brother. The only person who understood. He couldn't finish the sentence. Gail sat down next to her father. She had never seen him like this. Dean Martin didn't show emotion. Dean Martin didn't cry. Dean Martin kept everything locked up behind that famous smile. But tonight the walls were down. "He saved my life, you know," Dean said quietly. Gail was confused. "What do you mean?" "Every time I called him, I told myself it was to check on him, to make sure he was okay, but the truth is, I needed those calls too. I needed to know that someone understood, that I wasn't alone in this." "In what, Dad?" Dean looked at his daughter. For a moment she saw behind the mask. She saw the loneliness, the fear, the darkness that he had spent his entire life hiding. "In pretending," he said. "In wearing the mask. In being so afraid that people will see the real you that you forget who the real you is." Gail didn't know what to say. Peter understood that. He was the only one who understood. And now he's gone. And I don't know who I'm going to talk to. Dean Martin attended Peter Sellers' memorial service in London. He flew across the Atlantic, something he rarely did. He sat in the back of the church wearing dark glasses, trying not to be noticed. But people noticed. Of course they noticed. Dean Martin at Peter Sellers' funeral. The press would write about it. They would speculate about the connection between these two men, but they would never know the truth. They would never know about the phone calls, the 3 a.m. conversations, the 17 years of quiet, consistent friendship that had kept both men alive. After the service, Peter's widow Lynn approached Dean. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It would have meant so much to Peter." Dean nodded, unable to speak. "He talked about you, you know, more than anyone. He said you were the truest friend he ever had." Dean took off his glasses. His eyes were red. "He saved my life," Dean said. "He probably never knew it, but he did. Every week when we talked, he gave me a reason to keep going. He made me feel less alone." Lynn took Dean's hand. He felt the same way. "He told me once that your calls were the only thing that made sense in his life. Everything else was chaos, but you were consistent. You showed up. Every week. No matter what." Dean couldn't hold back the tears anymore. "I don't know what I'm going to do without him." Lynn squeezed his hand. "You're going to keep going. That's what Peter would want. That's what you taught him to do. One foot in front of the other. One day at a time." Dean nodded. He put his glasses back on. He walked out of the church into the gray London morning. And he kept going. Just like he told Peter to do. One foot in front of the other. But he never stopped missing his friend. In the years that followed Peter's death, Dean Martin changed. People noticed, even if they didn't understand why. He became more withdrawn, more solitary. The legendary parties slowed down. The public appearances became rarer. Dean spent more and more time alone in his house, watching television, playing golf, avoiding the world. Some people attributed it to aging. Some people attributed it to the natural winding down of a long career. But those closest to Dean knew better. He was grieving. Not just for Peter, though that was part of it. He was grieving for the connection he had lost. The one person who understood him. The one relationship where he didn't have to pretend. Dean's daughter, Dina, later wrote about her father's friendship with Peter Sellers. "My father never talked about it while Peter was alive. It was private, sacred almost. But after Peter died, sometimes my father would mention him. Always casually, always in passing. Peter would have liked this movie. Or Peter used to say something funny about that. Little things. But I could see what it meant to him. I could see the hole Peter's death had left." She continued. "I didn't understand the depth of their friendship until years later, when I was going through my father's things after he passed. I found notebooks, pages and pages of dates and times, every phone call they ever had. My father had kept a record, not notes about what they discussed, just the dates. Like he was marking off proof that the friendship was real, that it had happened, that for 17 years he had someone to talk to." Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. 15 years after Peter Sellers. In his final years, Dean was a shadow of his former self. The death of his son Dino in 1987 had shattered him. The losses accumulated. Sammy Davis Jr. in 1990. Other friends, one by one. But those who knew him said he often spoke of Peter, not to the public, never to the press, but to his family, to the few people he trusted. He used to say that Peter was waiting for him, Dina recalled. He believed they would meet again, that they would have one more conversation, one more phone call. On Christmas Day 1995, Dean Martin closed his eyes for the last time. He was 78 years old. Maybe somewhere, in whatever comes after, a phone is ringing. Maybe Peter is answering. Maybe they're finally having that conversation they missed in July of 1980. Maybe the darkness doesn't get the last word after all. The story of Dean Martin and Peter Sellers is not a story about fame or success or the entertainment industry. It's a story about the power of showing up, week after week, year after year, without fanfare, without recognition, without expecting anything in return. It's a story about what it means to truly see another person, to look past the masks and the performances and the public images, and to recognize the struggling human being underneath. It's a story about fighting the darkness, not alone, but together. Two men who could have easily lost themselves in their pain, who instead found in each other a reason to keep going. Dean Martin never talked about these phone calls publicly. He never wrote about them in interviews or used them to enhance his image. He simply made them. Every week. For 17 years. That's what real friendship looks like. Not grand gestures or public declarations. Just consistency, just showing up, just being there, again and again, until being there becomes its own kind of love. Peter Sellers struggled his entire life with a darkness that most people couldn't understand. But he had Dean Martin. One voice on the phone. One friend who called without being asked. One person who refused to let him fight alone. And Dean Martin, for all his fame and success, struggled with his own demons. The loneliness, the masks, the fear of being truly known. But he had Peter. One person who understood. One friend who accepted him completely. They saved each other. Not once in some dramatic moment, but continuously. Phone call by phone call. Conversation by conversation. Year by year. That's the legacy that matters. Not the movies or the songs or the awards. The phone calls. The showing up. The simple, profound act of being there for another human being. Next time you think about reaching out to someone who might be struggling, remember Dean Martin and Peter Sellers. Remember that a phone call can save a life. Remember that consistency is its own kind of courage. And remember that the darkness doesn't have to win. Not if we refuse to let each other fight it alone. That's what Dean taught Peter. That's what Peter taught Dean. That's what they can teach all of us. Pick up the phone. Make the call. Show up. It might mean more than you ever know.